Hello. The theme for this week is reflection, is looking back and moving forwards. If I had my Habits and Mind puppets with me, we'd have Flexi, our reflection elephant, who'd help us to do just that, just to, in this last week of term before the summer holidays, to just stop, to pause and to think, to look backwards and then to move forwards, looking ahead to next year, to the challenges of a new year group, of a new teacher, and of the new challenges that will lay ahead. When we look back, we see certain things. When we look back, we can see all the things that we have achieved. And we can look back and see all the things that we're proud of. When we look back, we can see some of the mistakes we made, and we can learn from them. Some of the things that we wish we had done differently. And when we look back, we can see what helped us to overcome the challenges we faced, what helped us to get through those difficult times, what helped us to achieve what we were able to achieve. I hope when you look back at the year we've just had, you can look back with real pride over how hard you've worked and how you've risen to the many challenges that this year has thrown at us. But also take the time to think, what would you have done differently? Your challenge this week in collective worship time will be to think of some advice, some top tips for the year group who are going to be going into the year group you are now. So for my year twos, for example, they're going to be thinking of some advice for the current year ones who will be doing year two next year. You're the experts. You've now completed that year. So what do you need to do to what did you do and what would you do differently so that can be a really successful year? We can pass on our expertise. So this week is a good chance to reflect and to think about what we can learn from the year we've just had so we can go into next year raring to go, ready to do our best, ready to move on with boldness and courage. Wanted to start this week just with a story from the Bible which is fits really well with this idea of looking back, ready to move forward. And it takes us to a part of the Bible where we have a bit of a hero called Joshua. Now Joshua was someone that God had raised up to be a leader of the Israelite people. He takes over at a point, takes over from Moses at a point where the Israelites have been freed from slavery in Egypt and across the Red Sea to escape the Pharaoh and his armies, but then had kind of lost their way a bit. They'd stopped trusting God and they'd ended up wandering around the desert for 40 years, unable to really trust God as they had done before. And so God appoints Joshua and talks to Joshua and says, look, I'm going to make you bold and courageous, and you're going to finally lead the Israelite people into the promised land that I've given you, the promised land that is ready for you to walk into. There was a bit of an obstacle before they got there, though. Joshua was ready to go. He'd inspired everyone that now was the time, and they'd seen that the promised land was close. But there was a very wide river in the way, the River Jordan, and he had a whole thousands of people, an army included, that needed to get across this river. There was no bridge, there was no easy way across, but it was the way they needed to go. And God said to Joshua, we're going to cross it. Send your priests out with the Ark of the Covenant to stand in the water, and as they stand in the water, it will stop flowing. The water will stop upstream, and so it will be dry for you to pass and cross over the water. I'll do a miracle for you so you can cross the Jordan and come into the promised land. Now, Joshua took a moment, I think, probably to pause and to think, because this was no ordinary moment. God had said to him that he was going to do something miraculous, something amazing, but also something that might have been hard to believe in some ways, something that might have been hard to fully trust. But he took that moment to look back, he took that moment to reflect. And when he looked back, he would have seen a few different things. As we said, the first thing he might have seen is all that they've had achieved in the past. What had they achieved already? Well, God had led them away from Pharaoh and the Egyptians where they were slaves. He'd taken them right away from Egypt, a miracle in itself. Moses had boldly led them into freedom, and he'd been with them all the way through. So he had something that he could trust. As he looked back and saw all that they had achieved, that would have given him strength to know, actually, God can do what he says he's going to do. He can get us across this river. Second thing he might have saw as he looked back were the mistakes that the Israelite people had made in the past. God had delivered them away from Egypt, but then for years and years they stopped trusting God. They kept on complaining at God for not giving them what they needed. They kept on arguing with God. And then they ended up trusting things that they made with their own hands rather than God. They trusted things that they could build themselves, things that they could see themselves, rather than trusting in the God who had delivered them from their enemies, the God who had provided for them with food and with drink all the way through their time in the desert. So he would have looked back and seen the mistakes and hopefully thought, I'm not going to make those mistakes again. We're going to do it right this time. We're going to trust God properly, and we're going to trust that he will help us across this river and into the promised land. And finally, as he looked back, he would have seen all the ways that God had already helped them. And in particular, he would have seen or remembered that when they escaped from Egypt, the same thing had happened at the Red Sea. They got to the Red Sea, Moses got to the Red Sea, and they went, oh no, we've got away from Egypt, but now we're stuck. We've got Pharaoh's armies charging towards us, and we've got this enormous expanse of water that is in our way. We are trapped, we are stuck. But they weren't, because God directed Moses to lift up his staff, and the water parted and they crossed the Red Sea on dry land. And when they were across, the water rushed back and the Egyptians couldn't get them. Very similar situation to the one they were now in, not being pursued by any enemies, but they still had a huge river to cross. And God said, I'll do it again, just like the Red Sea, I'll do it again. So as Joshua looked back, he would have seen that actually he was helped through, or they were helped through. The Israelites had been helped in this way before, and they can trust that maybe God would do the same thing again. And this is what happens. The priests go out with the Ark of the Covenant into the water, and as they step into the water, into the middle of the river, the waters part, and it stops, and so there is dry land. And as they cross over, the thousands of people cross over onto the other side, into the plains of Jericho, where they're about to take the land that God has given them. Joshua, under God's direction, says, look, we need to pick up 12 stones. Each tribe of Israel needs to pick up a stone, a big stone, and we'll carry it across, and we'll make up a little sort of pillar of stones on the other side, as a way of remembering that God has helped us today, as a way of, in the future, looking back and going, God helped us when things seemed impossible, when things seemed like they were too challenging. Those stones remind us of what God did. And that's what the story is really useful as we think about looking backwards to move forward this week. We need to look back just like Joshua did and look for the times when things that we can be really proud of, the things that we've already achieved. We can look back and see the mistakes we made and try and do it differently this time. And we can look back and see all the ways that we were helped with what was difficult, with what was challenging, and know that that help will be there again. So as you think about this year, think about those three things. Think about what advice you would give to the year group who are about to do the year you've just achieved. Our advice will be a bit like those stones that they picked out of the river and set up as a little monument to remind them of what God had done for them. These stones will be a reminder to the year group below of the fact that if we work hard and if we do our best and if we listen to the advice of others, we can achieve great things. So enjoy this time of reflecting this week. Enjoy the final week of term as we build towards the summer holidays. take that moment to pause and think, how have we come this far, and how can we boldly move forward? In the Bible, Joshua, the man we've been talking about, God said to him, be bold and courageous. I'm making you bold and courageous. Well, that's our prayer for collective worship today, Lord, that God would make us bold and courageous as we move forward into the new challenges of next year in September. So enjoy reflecting on that this week, and have a great week and a wonderful summer holidays.